Welcome to Reaction. I'm Maggie Pagano, Executive Editor, and with me today to talk about the pickle that the Tory party seem to have found themselves in is Tim Montgomerie, as we know, one of the most distinguished commentators and knows the Tory party inside out. Now, Tim, it's been a rough few days. One of the leading MPs yesterday suggested that there was an unpleasant odour coming from underneath the Conservative Party. And he was referring to the foreign aid cuts, but also all the nonsense about gesture politics following the England football match final, should we say. So is that a fair assessment, do you think?
Well, it was certainly a striking observation, and it's the sort of thing, Maggie, you might expect to be said by a Labour politician or a Liberal Democrat politician about the Conservative Party. But for a Conservative former Chief Whip, former International Development Secretary, as Andrew Mitchell is, for a Conservative to talk about an unpleasant odour emerging from underneath the door of the Conservative Party was very striking. And I don't know what your view, Maggie, is on the specifics of the aid budget, but I certainly regarded the commitment to 0.7% that was made during the Cameron years as one of the real moral achievements of those Conservative years. I put that alongside the legislation for gay marriage. I put it alongside the introduction of universal credit, which has made the benefit system so much simpler and accessible for people when they're in need. I'd say the debt repayment of those years, which means we weren't leaving debt for future generations. I'd say the creation of jobs, the jobs miracle of those Conservative years. Those would probably be my five sort of top moral achievements of the Conservative years. And for the Conservative Party to abandon the aid commitment, it's the only cut they've made, remember, during the pandemic. They could have cut all sorts of things, but the one cut that they've made is Britain's commitment to the poorest people on the planet. And of course, it's tough times for the UK economy, but actually you give to the people who need most generously and most steadfastly when they're in most trouble as well. You know, we are, of course, suffering from the pandemic, but that's small beer compared to the troubles facing developing countries and people in those countries. And so, yeah, I think the debate yesterday was a disappointment. I don't think Rishi Sunak really made any real concessions to the rebels. And I'm afraid now a manifesto promise that the Conservatives made to spend 0.7% of national income on GDP has been abandoned. And I think while superficially popular in opinion polls, I think there'll be more people who might vote against the Conservatives on this issue than actually will change their voting behaviour in favour of the Conservative Party because of it. So there may be electoral consequences.
No, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point, because they say that most people actually approved of this when polling. But of course, it's how you ask the question, isn't it? And how you load it. And I don't believe for one moment. And you can go into the arguments about, well, actually 0.7 was a big increase. You know, Labour only did 0.2. But the point is, it was a promise. Yeah. And I think when you make a promise like that, you're undermining yourself. I cannot understand what will have gone on in their heads in cabinet when this proposal was made. I mean, as you say, so many other bits could have been chopped off to save, what is it, a couple of billion? It just makes, you know, we'll go on to the football in a minute. It sort of reinforces, I mean, to go back to Theresa May, the nasty party. That's what I felt when I heard Andrew Mitchell's comments. Yeah. And it's not true, you know, this was an increase, but why would you go back? But anyway, Tim, enough of that. You're actually planning this is not a victory, is it? Because you are launching your own sort of guerrilla campaign, is that true?
Yeah, I hope it's something we'll be featuring regularly, Maggie, in these reaction videos. I've been talking to Conservative MPs overnight, to some of the development charities that I've worked with over the years. And if numbers 10 and 11 Downing Street think that they have won this campaign because of yesterday's victory, I hope to do a little bit to cause them a little bit of unsettlement, really, because the fact is that people will die because of yesterday's vote. You know, let's put it, very few times that there are votes in Parliament where you know people will die. But the fact is, programmes that the British government, the British people are committed to, health programs, nutrition programs, climate resistance programs. We didn't just stop those for the future. We abandoned projects in the middle of those projects that had only just begun or hadn't been finished. For me, that's almost the most outrageous thing about this. You can support 0.5% of, spending income, national income on aid. You can support 0.7%. You can support 0.9, whatever. But what I don't think anyone should support is the fact that in the middle of commitments we had made to some of the most vulnerable people who we share this planet with, we've upsticked and abandoned them.
And during the pandemic, when those
during the pandemic, absolutely.
It's sort of unbelievable, actually. Do you think they could go back and reverse this? Do you think if your campaign, how many was it? 30. What was the victory? It was quite slender.
Yes, they had over 30. The government, of course, have a majority of over 80. So this is the biggest rebellion. Yeah. I think the government has, or one of the biggest rebellions, certainly, that they've faced. But only 24 Tories in the end voted against them. And I thought the rebels were bought off relatively cheaply, to be honest. There is a sort of an attempt now to get the House of Lords. Technically, I think they need to get the House of Lords approval for this. I don't know how that battle between the two houses will work. Ultimately, the House of Commons will get its way. So even if the Lords does get involved, it will only be a delaying tactic. But there is this court called public opinion. And a few of us are determined to at least embarrass the government over this, because some of us do think actually there will be a public opinion price to pay for this. And as you just sort of suggested, Maggie, you ask the question in different ways, you get different results. You ask, do you support the aid budget? People generally say no. But if you ask people, do you support hunger programs, anti-hunger programs? Do you support programs to give people protection from malaria? People support that. The more specific you are, which is true of most of the British aid project, you find that people support what the aid budget supports at much higher levels.
Of course, and of course, it's been twisted as well, hasn't it? So, would you support, I don't know, dance classes in Ethiopia or something, or whatever? And of course, you're going to say, well, no, that's not a great use of money anyway. Or they don't need to be taught how to dance, actually.
Well, I probably do need to be taught how to dance, but I wouldn't want taxpayers' money to be spent on it. And no, look, I don't support those aspects. There are plenty of things in the aid budget that I don't support. But, I think that's naughty, really, because there's plenty of things that the NHS spends money on we wouldn't support. None of us would support. Or the Defence Department or the Education Department, every department of government in British history, in world history, misspends some money. The important thing is to cut down that waste, get rid of those bad programs, not to stop doing that kind of work completely.
Just normal, better scrutiny and accountability.
Yeah.
Now, what about the other pickle they've seemed to have got themselves into, and that is over the response to the social media abuse against the footballers for missing those penalties on Sunday, which I think has been over-egged. But you yourself don't support the taking of the knee, do you, Tim? Or have you perhaps... Sorry, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but how do you see the incident?
Well, I'm trying to sort of be reflective on this at the moment, because at a fundamental level, I don't support taking the knee because of what it's associated with. It's a symbol that the Black Lives Matter movement in America have popularized. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement, I think probably most viewers of this video now are familiar with these arguments, but they support defunding the police. They believe in critical race theory being taught in schools. It basically tells, about the guilt of white people. It's anti-capitalism, it's anti the family. And so at that sort of intellectual level, Maggie, I have to sort of, continue to be worried about what taking the knee represents to people like me. But you get to the point whereby I think probably most people just see taking the knee as an anti-racist gesture, a position. And when the Conservatives sort of talk about, like I've just done, it looks like we're somehow equivocal about racism. And I think you get to a point sometimes where you just have to surrender and say, I've made the intellectual argument, but we're just getting into stickier and stickier position. And you know, it's quite amazing, really, that the most diverse cabinet in British history, which is what Boris Johnson leads, is sort of now getting tainted with racism. It's unfair, but it's becoming a political problem. And certainly the BBC and the media, what are we now on? Day 3 of this being the main story in the news? And
still being whipped up.
That's
But
not
it
good.
also shows, sorry, Tim, to cut, rather like the aid, though, I think they've misread the mood. As you say, we know intellectually what BLM is all about, but this had nothing, I mean, the idea that Harry Kane or Rashford are bowing because they want to overthrow or defund the police is such a nonsense. And I don't know if you read Danny Finkelstein this morning, he wrote most
it was a good piece.
and I think he was right. It was people feel frustrated. They want to give a symbol for how they feel and to show that they care. It was very simple. And I think some of the politicians misread that very badly, really bad. And they need to go back and rethink how they're big fights, but there's not, this was the wrong fight.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Priti Patel got herself in a, bit of a sticky position. And gesture politics, we all gesture, all politics is gesture. And somebody made the comment, in the House of Commons, they spend their time booing and jeering at each other. So the idea that in a crowd you can't boo, it's got out of hand.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not going to criticize Priti Patel because not least she's faced enormous racism in her own personal history. I made potentially the same tactical mistake as her. But what I regret increasingly in our sort of public culture is it's just a lack of grace generally. The fact is that Priti Patel is not a racist. The people who objected to taking the knee, like myself, were not racist. We perhaps got the tactics wrong, the position wrong. Perhaps we weren't respectful enough to the English players. I'm certainly willing to concede all of that. But the automatic sort of then assumption and charge that you're racist is just, I'm afraid, part of how our public square is the mean thing that it's increasingly becoming.
No, and that's in itself is tragic. It's become so binary, hasn't it? There's no nuance. And of course, Priti's comments were nuanced if you listen to them, which I did again yesterday. And there is no way. And it's very, very sad. How do we move out of this, though? How do we have a really frank, honest, and Running Me Trust this morning, I don't know if you saw their report, apparently saying that there is systemic racism in Britain. Do you think that's true?
I don't personally, although perhaps I'm not the best person to comment on that. But two things I would say in response to what you've just asked is, first of all, I think the Conservative government should just focus on doing practical things. So let's, get social media. There's this conference that's been taking place, these meetings between the Home Secretary of Downing Street and the social media giants. Get them to clean up their act. It's ridiculous that they don't have some sort of system whereby they can identify who is using their platforms. You can just register with a credit card for 1 penny or something, would at least give them a basic identification mechanism for the vast majority of their users. They might resist that because it might affect their profits. I say, so what? Have that sort of system of registration. But I don't think there is a way the Conservative Party can or should, give up on this. The idea that the Conservative Party is the one that's stoking these culture wars is a nonsense to me. Talk to the average parent of a child at school at the moment and their complaint about what their kids are learning about transgender issues, for example, or British history, is not the average British citizen who started these culture wars. It's people in education, it's people in law, it's people in the media who've basically been on a crusade to, for example, make the argument that Britain is part of a rotten civilization, Western civilization. Conservatives have to fight back against all of that. And so we mustn't give up on the culture wars. I think the lesson of recent times is we need to fight them more intelligently, not to surrender.
And with more sympathy and pick the right ones. But you're so right. I mean, I have a lot of friends in France and across Europe, and the way that immigrants and people of color are treated in those countries is far, far worse than anything that is experienced here in Britain. We've obviously had some bad instances, but overall, I think it would be very wrong to say that we're a racist country. Although I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, or if you feel that you're being if you feel that you're under attack for racism, then I guess we have to understand that feeling too.
Yeah.
So there is a big conversation to be had.
Certainly is.
Thank you, Tim. That was wonderful, very interesting as always. And if you liked what you heard today, then you can perhaps subscribe on the YouTube channel and take a look at our website, which is www.reaction.life, where we have a free trial for 30 days. So you can sample what we have on the site. Thank you.